Hi, welcome to this concert talk of From the Forest to the Stars, Peter and the Wolf, and Other Animated Works. Um, so this is a talk that I'm doing of a concert that I gave, a Zoom talk that I gave a couple weeks ago. I tragically forgot to record it. So for anyone who asked for a recording, this is for you, um, back by popular demand. So a bit about me, if you don't know who I am. My name is Nikki Pett. I am a classical clarinetist, and I'm currently a first-year master's student at the Yale School of Music, which I've been attending remotely ever since lockdown started. So the other thing I've been doing since lockdown started is animated musical performances, um, digital, done online, because in our current climate, uh, it's not great for wind players who essentially spew aerosols for a living. So had to come up with an alternate performance technique. So that's a partial answer to, why animation? Why do these animated videos? The other reason is one that, would drive this even if COVID hadn't happened. Um, and that's because there's this issue of, is classical music dying? So you get your op-ed pieces, you get your, criticisms. This is also something that was asked in one form or another for a response on every single Masters of Music application that I submitted about a year and a half ago when I was applying. Um, and this is also an issue that I'm seeing and have been seeing my entire classical music career um, on a very personal level. One layer of this is that all my friends in undergrad, I went to Columbia University, non-music major, and most of my friends weren't musicians. Classical music isn't really the go-to genre um, for, I think, the average person my age, especially if you have no prior exposure to classical music, which is, I think, a significant portion of the population. Um, and the other part is from my own personal experience, is that even though I am now a classical musician, I've been playing classical music since I was 5. It was a very difficult genre for me to actually appreciate listening to. Playing has always been fun. It's always entertaining and um, just enjoyable thing that I've done. But it took me a really long time. I think 10 years since I started playing the piano at age 5 to really start enjoying listening to classical music concerts, or even listening to recordings on my own time. It's not something that came very easily to me. Um, and that's because I think a lot of the beauty in classical music comes from the nuance and the subtlety of the pieces. And if you aren't aware in prior to listening of those nuances, it can be very hard to relate to a lot of music. It seems very inaccessible. You don't know what it's trying to say. Um, so as a performer, I want to make classical music, these nuances, the subtleties, and really the beauty, immediately accessible to people who have absolutely no frame of context um, for for this type of music. So how do I do that? One version is what I'm doing right now, which is talking before concerts and sort of highlighting little bits and pieces to listen for. That can be helpful. Another way is performing music that has storylines. So some pieces have this baked in. For example, Peter and the Wolf, which is will be featured later on this concert, is a very famous example of this. But for me, I really, this hit home for me when I was performing Igor Stravinsky's A Soldier's Tale. When I was a junior in college, we were doing This piece is basically similar to Peter and the Wolf. There's narration, and there's also dancers and actors with a large chamber ensemble. And it's Stravinsky music. It's a bit avant-garde. It's not your average sort of classical music. Can be a little inaccessible, I think, for a lot of people. Um, but the best feedback that I got on this concert that I did was that, I had a friend who came up to me, completely no classical music background, and she said, I think under any other circumstance, I would have hated this music. It it's not what I like. It's not what I like to listen to. Um, but having this storyline, having the characters and the dance and the visual set aspect, um, it was just so illustrative, and I really understood what the music was trying to say. And I want to go back and listen to it more. It really came alive. And that was the best feedback that I could ever want, is being able to deliver this music that I love and I think is so cool and complex, and have someone who doesn't know anything about it just to instantaneously understand. So that then brings me to animation. So not every piece of music is like Peter and the Wolf or A Soldier's Tale, where it has a narration or narrative element to it. But I think that every piece of music does have a story, whether it's an actual narrative, whether it's just an atmosphere, or just something visual that can be conveyed through the music, or at least that will have a visual that enhances the listening experience. So, what do I mean by that? You see this a lot in movies where you'll have the visuals that are going on. There's the movie shooting aspect, but then there's the film scoring. And oftentimes, if you took each part individually, they're not going to be as compelling as when you put them together. So I'm going to demonstrate this with this scene from the Aristocats. So what I want you to do first, close your eyes and we'll just listen to the music. Okay, ready? Eyes closed.
Wait for me, wait for me! Me first, me first! Oh. Why should you be first? Because I'm a lady.
Okay, so you can open your eyes now. I wouldn't expect anyone to really think of, oh yeah, that music was so descriptive, or it really told me what was happening in the story, if you just heard it on its own, especially if you were to imagine that there was no dialogue. However, this music is extremely descriptive of what's happening when you see the visuals together. So we'll watch it again, and I want you to listen for how, in the first part, the kittens are running from the Aristocats, and then the music also sort of runs with them. It's sort of this jaunty, cheerful tune. Then they get stuck in a cat flap. And then when they get stuck, the music also sort of flops with this little brass kind of wah. Um, so yeah, we'll watch it again and see what difference having that visual with the music makes.
Wait for me, wait for me! Me first, me first! Oh. Why should you be first? Because I'm a lady, that's why.
Sorry, I wouldn't pause. Yeah, but there we have it. This is a funny frame to stop on. But yeah, you can see that there's a pretty big difference between hearing the music and then having that visual to enhance it. Or even just if you wanted to run this experiment again of watching this clip without any music at all. And it's fine, you know what's happening, but it's a lot more compelling when you add the musical element. So in this context, in a lot of context of movies, usually the music isn't designed to stand on its own. Usually it's, as we just saw in Fantasia, it's really done more as a secondary to enhance whatever storyline is going on. So it's compelling, but you wouldn't necessarily go to see, the Aristocats score live in concert if there was no visual component playing with it. However, if you were to take this concept of the visual being to enhance music and vice versa, um, it suddenly changes when you apply it to a piece of music that is meant to stand on its own. And this is what Disney's Fantasia did, because they took these pieces of music, both very famous and also maybe not so famous, um, and they added storylines and visuals and animation to create a very holistic um, story, basically, of these pieces. And for me, this is really one of the most the most influential, I think, um, forms of performance that I ever saw. Those pieces on Fantasia remain to this day um, some of my most favorite pieces, just because I see them and I have that association of, oh, this is, these crocodiles were dancing here, or the dinosaurs are fighting, for Dance of the Hours and Rite of Spring, which were both featured. And it just provided so much more context into these pieces that were then, when I heard them in the concert halls later, I still had that connection with me. So this is my motivation for doing animation, and trying to create really that connection with other pieces, especially of clarinet music, that might be a bit harder to access. So the first piece that I did this with was Max Reger's Alpenblatt. So this is a piece that I put out last June. It was actually started as just an exercise that my teacher wanted me to do to work on, some technique, um, just as a clarinet thing. um, and but what really informed me was when he said, "Oh, Alpenblatt means autumn leaf." He didn't actually say that, I don't think. I think Zoom garbled it because we were doing Zoom classes then. Um, he said album leaf, which is what the translation um, goes to in German, which is just a type of musical setting. But I heard autumn leaf, and that really informed how I thought about the piece. And I heard it as basically a changing of the seasons, and as the leaves falling down in autumn. So pretty straightforward. It was sort of just an experiment, first foray into this animation genre. So I'll show you what I mean by uh, falling leaves. So here's our, the tree. Here's me. Here's me again. And then you'll notice that uh, the leaves will disappear in time with the music. And not only is it going to be with clarinet, but also with the piano. So this is a way of sort of visually highlighting the lines that sort of interweave between the clarinet and the piano. So if you see something's happening and you're listening to the clarinet and nothing's happening in the clarinet, shift your attention back to the piano and see what's going on there, and vice versa. Um, so yeah, let's take a listen, a little watch. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. Um, so this is something, not to toot my own horn, but this actually worked surprisingly well. This piece certainly isn't a big standard of clarinet repertoire. It's not something that I think even clarinetists necessarily know of. Um, but I didn't realize actually how effective it was until I played it at my grandfather's memorial service last fall. So my grandfather passed away last October, and we had played it for him. I played this piece for him, before, and he really liked it. So when he passed away, thought it would be a good idea to play it at his memorial service as, a tribute and as, something that he really enjoyed. And it was kind of shocking how well it worked and how emotionally impactful it was. Having this sort of season changing feeling in that context with a piece that really wasn't meant to be, that intense. It shocked me even by how intensely it conveyed those feelings of sort of seasons changing, especially from essentially fall to winter. So in that context, um, it sort of demonstrated to me how powerful this medium could actually be. So yeah, and that I think really spurred me to continue with this genre as more than just, experimental. Trying to figure out what works, because it really demonstrated to me that it is useful, or not useful, but it's effective. Um, so the next big project that I did was Peter and the Wolf. So I mentioned Peter and the Wolf earlier as something that has already a story built in. So then the question is, do you really need to, add more animation to it? What's the point? And for me, the point is really trying to bring out the inherent musicality and description of the events, even within the music, because it's structured where there's narration, music, narration, music. Occasionally they overlap. But the music is so descriptive visually of, what is going on in the story that I really wanted to bring that out in the music. So we'll see a clip now, basically, of the clarinet solo, the cat, when she first appears. So at first, so this is the scene where the cat has her eyes on the bird. She's ready to pounce, so to speak. But basically, the cat is approaching, and musically, the musician knows this because the phrase first starts out, the first cat theme is very quiet. And the cat's sort of further away and a bit hidden. And then the second time it comes back around, it's a lot louder. So the cat's on top of the bird basically and about to pounce. So the way I did this visually to sort of enhance this difference, it probably not immediately recognizable if you're not looking at the score, is I had the cat, sort of more in the background, and had smaller movements, and just the tail would flick, or the eyes would blink on certain important beats. And the second time around, the cat's closer. It's a lot bigger, and the movements are also bigger. And it's ready. It's crawling towards the bird. Dinner time, so to speak. So let's take a watch of that.
Suddenly, something caught Peter's attention. He noticed a cat crawling through the grass. The cat thought, "The bird is busy arguing. I'll just grab her." Stealthily, she crept toward her on velvet paws. "Look out!" shouted Peter,
and it ends on the big crash. So that's Peter and the Wolf. Another fun fact about this performance that is beyond the animation, whereas all the other characters are similarly done to the cat. But this is special because it's, with my quintet at Yale, and we've never actually met and played together in real life before, even to this day. Before, didn't know each other. During, we never saw each other except over Zoom. And since then, we also have, never played together in person. So it was a really interesting and challenging process of basically layering recordings over each other, um, you know, one by one instead of, rehearsing in the normal way. Um, and yeah, that is Peter and the Wolf. Oops. So the last piece on today's program is Bach's Second Violin Partita. So this is a piece that is currently in progress. It's also been a very big undertaking, hefty. Um, so this piece contains possibly one of the most famous pieces in violin solo repertoire, which is the Chaconne movement. Sadly, that's still under construction, still being animated. So currently, and on today's docket is only the lesser known movements. But this piece was a bit challenging, not only because we're taking violin music and turning it into wind music, which has its own challenges, because the violin can play two notes at once. It's very fun. Us lowly wind players can't do that. So I enlisted the help of my sister, who I've been quarantining with. She plays oboe. Her name's Caitlin. She's fantastic. So those more complex parts we did as a duet. So the Chaconne movement is full of that. And there's also one movement, the Sarabande, which will be played today. But the other challenging part, just beyond the music itself, was finding what kind of story do you want to tell with this music? It's not like Peter and the Wolf, where there's a narrative, baked in very easy. And it's not even like Alpenblatt, where I have an image of, oh, this is the autumn leaf. So we had to really think about, how do we tie these movements, which were basically originally dance movements, is what partitas are. It's a collection of dances, not necessarily to be danced to, especially by the time Bach was writing, but based on dance styles. Didn't want to animate actual dancing. That would have taken forever. And I don't think would have been that effective. But I thought it would be interesting to connect things through this lens of going on a journey through outer space and seeing all the different features. And there's also these two different juxtaposing types of movement. There's a lot more slow and introspective movements, versus the sort of firework, virtuosic movements. So we start the first movement, the Alemand, from the Earth to the Moon, close to home. So this is a more introspective movement. So I wanted the animation to be more gradual. Personally, this is also, I think, one of the more musically compelling movements. So I really didn't want the animation to cloud or distract from the music itself. So what I did was just have very gradual changes throughout. So you'll see if you watch this all the way through, basically it goes through the course of a day, and then the moon appears and gets bigger and bigger, as if you're getting closer to it from the Earth to the moon. But to show you the slow nature of this, I'm going to play the part that has the most action, which is the sunset. But even this moves very slowly, just to illustrate that sort of gradual change. there we have it. So the next step, a little further out, is the courant, the sun. So this is one of those more virtuosic fireworky movements. And with the sun, what has impact is solar flares, is what I came up with. And this movement is also, so courant or corrente means to run. So it's a lot jumpier. And having these solar flares sort of jumping, I thought was really illustrative of this concept. So you'll notice later when I play a little bit, there's sort of these big flares for the more impactful moments, and then smaller flares that cascade over each other for a more continuous whoosh in a way. Let's take a listen. All right. So third movement, continue zooming out, and now we're at the whole solar system. This was the first movement that I made. These weren't done in chronological order. And this is also a duet movement with my sister Caitlin. So the courant is, or sorry, the saraband is much more of an introspective movement. It's based on a very slow, stately dance that sort of has these big, big beat, big impacts. Sort of, it's a bit like a waltz, but slower. And instead of a 1, 2, 3, it still has that 3 beat, but it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. But the 3 is sort of not as important. So the other feature of this is that because there's 2 players, you start to have the 2 voices moving separately. So how do I represent this visually? How is that sort of able to be made a bit clearer? So here we have the solar system, not actually correct due to some issues with sizing and placement. You'll notice Venus is first, then we have Jupiter, Earth and Mars, I think, are in the right space, but then Mercury's way on the outside. But what you'll see is that on these big, 1, 2 beats, these planets will jump forward a little bit more to sort of emphasize those beats. It's pretty subtle. Since this was an earlier test, I had a bit of trouble figuring out how to, place things, and I didn't want it to, pop out too suddenly. So I was a bit more conservative. So it's a bit harder to see unless you're looking for it. I basically just didn't want it to be jarring with the music, which is, more introspective and more settled. And then the other feature with the 2 different voices, the clarinet and the oboe moving independently of each other, is that sometimes some planets will move with the clarinet. Other times, a couple planets, maybe 2 out of the 5, will move with the oboe. So if you see, if you watch carefully later, you can keep your eye out for that. But let's see a little example of this from the beginning. So subtle, not, the most in your face, but I think that's also, in line with this more stately solemnity, in a way, of the movement. And almost subliminally directs the gaze, I think. Hopefully you think so too. Let me know if you agree. So this is finale. We've arrived at the end. It also premiered during the live show. That's why it says premiere here. But this is the hardest piece that I had to work on in this entire slew of animation. The reason it was so hard, firstly, is musical. This is written for the violin and very much not for the clarinet. So the jumps and the leaps and the speed was pretty difficult to wrap my head around playing wise. And then the other thing that was also really hard was the animation. Because for the other stuff, you know, I sort of had an idea of what I wanted it to look like. And when I, you know, made it a reality, it worked pretty well. It told the story that I wanted to tell. I also went into this movement thinking that I knew what I wanted it to look like. And when I animated it, it looked horrific. It was so bad. And I had to think, okay, so why isn't this working? What's wrong with this? And basically, sort of like the Quran, I had separated these, you know, the comet shower. Once again, we've moved beyond the solar system. Now we're out in open space and there's comets or meteors kind of shooting past you. I would have, you know, in this very firework-like movement, very virtuosic. On the really big, impactful parts, there would be a big comet, and then on the smaller, more cascading parts, there would be smaller comets. This didn't really work because this, as you'll hear later, there's a lot of quick running notes, and it's hard to hear sort of these big moments with just the big versus small separation. And what's really more important than just big versus small in this movement is actually the sequences, which, you know, as a musician, that's essentially all Bach is sequences and how to relate these sequences. But I didn't think about that for the visuals until I came to this roadblock that I had. So really highlighting those as the feature of this movement became how I told the visual story. So I'll show you what I mean. So in this section, basically there's sort of cascading this one phrase that'll gets like lower and lower in pitch, and also softer and softer in volume. So you'll see there are comments that start big, sort of cascade, and as the pitch decreases, their placement will also get lower, and their size will get smaller. And then after that piece is finished, the music scoops up again and rises up, and you'll see in the music there's a sort of scoop that are in the comets. They get small and go upwards, and as they get louder, just to sort of represent this this sequence. Let's take a look. Okay, I went a bit beyond what I described, but hopefully you get the idea. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you for coming to and watching, I guess, to this video. In the live version of this, I took questions here, but since this is not live, feel free to leave any questions you have in the comments. If you want to reach out to me directly, that's also cool if you know me and my number / email. Yeah, hopefully this was enjoyable. If you liked it and you're interested in keeping up with more videos, especially the Chaconne, which will be coming out hopefully within the next few months, please subscribe to my channel so you can stay updated. Yeah, I think that's it. All right, thanks. Thanks for listening. Bye.